The internet has completely ruined me. One of the funnier scenes, two women are going back and forth over the dead grandfather, just saying swear words about him. Somebody pops their head in and says, "Will you pray for me?" And Delia says, "Ancora domani." There's still tomorrow. And gosh darn, the clever people over at the pitch meeting on YouTube, I immediately turned to the screen and said, "That's the name of the movie!"
Solving problems with a light tug is tight.
I'm Eric Trommater.
I'm Erin Brown.
And I'm Sila Blume.
And this is World Cinema History.
This week, Ancora, Domani, an Italian film from 2023 that outgrossed both Barbie and Oppenheimer that year at the Italian box office. Directed by and starring Paola Cortellesi, a comedy about domestic abuse. It takes place in 1946. Filmed in the Romani language, in the style of the neo-realist of the post-war Italian era.
First of all, I'll be positive. I think she does, for the most part, a very, very good job with this film. I stopped the film after 8 minutes because I was confused. I wanted to double check when the film was made because I was so taken back to a different time. It flows very well with the idea of that style of filmmaking and the way she combines different things, including the abuse. The scene I have difficulties with, when the camera starts circling them and they show their teeth with chocolate. I found that was below the quality of this film, below conceptual filmmaking, and also below comedy. I found that shocked me, how she went to that kind of silly idea. When his name is William, the black soldier, when he speaks with her the first time.
Thank you so much.
I'm
sorry. Excuse me. Thank you very much for this.
Lo sapevo che era tua.
The acoustics are very strange. The sound of his voice is very different to the whole other parts of the film, at least until
He's
that.
dubbed for some reason.
Acoustically, they could have made the sound to blend more with each other, and that
Well,
really
what
shocked
you're
me.
hearing, what
A
you're hearing
break.
there is literally he's in a studio and she's on the street and they're intercutting.
We're not talking about Sembene, far from the city, when you have no technology. They could have done that in such a way that is not so drastic. But that's not a negativity I'm trying to. I just that shocked me.
I agree with you 100%. And you and I both know Italian film soundtracks have always been garbage. Just
You knew
they don't
that.
care
I
about
did
how
not know
the
that.
films sound.
In the same way that we found ourselves about a year ago dealing with too many films that were dealing with sexual abuse, let's say rape, I find it difficult to intellectually follow what she's trying to do, not just so much by talking about this topic, but the way that she presents it, specifically when they are dancing together while he's mistreating her. I keep going back to the example of Roberto Benigni with Life is Beautiful. When he puts humor, or when he uses humor for the Holocaust, to me, that's just my perception, to me it works very well. It's a genius way, the way he does it, even though that it's inconceivable to make fun of that. But he's not making fun of it. He's using humor. But it's blended well. But in this case, I have difficulties with kind of tango scene between him beating her. I just found from the thematic a little bit difficult, and I guess we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But that for me was very important aspect of the film to deal with the topic in such a way which I think needs a lot more respect or distance, especially when a woman is doing it. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know.
Paola Cortellesi has pointed out in interviews that every 72 hours in Italy, a woman dies as a result of domestic abuse, still to this day. I'm going to turn to you, Erin Brown, because this film literally starts with a slap in the face. There are some very violent scenes, but as Sila has pointed out, they are edited to these kind of almost love songs and done in a stylized version as a tango. How did you, as a woman, react to Cortellesi almost painting this very, very violent relationship as some sort of magical realism dance?
I thought it was a good choice, honestly. I like how she did that because it is a comedy. If she had shown the violence in a realistic way, it would have taken you out of the tone of the film. It would have been too brutal. It would have been really, really hard to watch. The way that it was presented, it was just, this is Delia's life. This is what she deals with. There were little things that she included to show how normalized this is. Like, the kids knew when Ivano was going to beat Delia. They knew, and you could see it in their faces. And Marcella took them out of the room, the boys. They all knew what was about to happen. Delia just stood there and waited for it to happen. And that's, having it be that normalized is like, oh, it's horrific. And so showing it as a dance was very imaginative. It was a very creative way of doing it, especially with the bruises fading. Like, he had her against the wall with his hand on her throat, and when he took his hand away, there's this huge bruise that just fades away, so you don't see it. It really worked, I thought. It was a really interesting and clever choice that, you realized the horror of what was happening, but it just would have been too much to show it realistically. It wouldn't have fit with the film. Also, I want to throw out there that the scene with the chocolate in their teeth, I think might be my favorite scene. It was so silly. And I liked that it was silly. I laughed so hard at that bit. That was the bit that actually really drew me into the film. I was enjoying it, and then that happened. I'm like, I love this. This is amazing. It has the film has this feel of all of the terrible things are happening, but it's still funny in various ways.
And I'll defend you on that, because there are moments of low humor, so it's not out of the blue. So in the opening sequence, she's emptying the grandfather's bedpan, cutting to a dog peeing on the road. There are little bits of low comedy. That one obviously is kind of the centerpiece of it. So it is. I don't think someone watching this film it's going to stick out to them.
My problem with that scene is the way the camera is circling them. I have no problems with the chocolate in the teeth.
Yeah, that it looks like something out of like an Alfred Hitchcock cutaway or something like that. It seems like it doesn't belong in this film, but there are other little bits throughout like that. So it's not so. I guess it's not so jarring in while watching the film itself as I think we're making it sound.
I feel like the camera moving, circling them, was to show that they're in their own little world. They're eating the chocolate together and smiling with the chocolate in their teeth, and they're not paying any attention to anything going on around them.
Yeah, I could agree with that. Yes.
Yeah, it's this idealized feeling of love, because we don't know if Nino was a good guy or not, but they love each other, and you can tell. And they're in their own little world, and the guy, Nino's customer, is back in the background yelling at him to pay attention to him and not Dahlia. And it's just, they're just so lost in their own little world. I thought that was a great scene, honestly. It's in a film full of great scenes.
I agree with you, but here's where Sila and I are probably going to be more in agreement. And Sila, correct me if I'm wrong, because I may be putting words into your mouth. It's a little too showy for the rest of the film, because throughout she is showing such directional excellence. That opening tracking shot in the old-fashioned way, put a dolly on train tracks the same way they would have had to if they were filming this in 1946 under the credit. It's so excellently done. And then, but to prove that she's not showing off, even though it is all technically one take, she's doing little cutaways and close-ups throughout it. So you're not getting the long take, so to speak. It's not. This is not a director flexing their muscles or flexing their showing off. But that one scene seems a little showy, I think, when compared to, and I don't think it's directed as well as the rest of the film. But you are right. The comedy of it is wonderful. The guy yelling for it because they can't hear, to your point, because they're so lost in what they're doing, they can't hear the guy yelling, and then finally, the magic spell is broken when you can hear the guy yelling who's out of focus, because of course she's doing this with a telephoto lens with a low depth of field. It is an excellent bit of comedy and made me laugh out loud. But to Sila's point, it felt out of place with the excellent but not showy direction of the rest of them.
I wouldn't use that terminology, but then again, I'm not a cineast as you are. But I think that is pretty accurate. It came to me. It did not belong there. It was too. I don't know if I want to say showy, but it was too simplistic to go to that. Maybe circling the couple from above, that maybe, but I will just rest that, because I also think, based on what Erin said, to make them make their own world, and you see the man waiting, shouting at him, that works very well in terms of separating their world from the rest of the world. So I'll just... Last
week, when we were talking about the birdcage and Mike Nichols' opening shot, one of your points was that it really fit with the mood of the film, which was it was bigger, it was bolder, it was more over the top, it was more drag than the previous two versions of that story, Staircase and La Cage aux Folles. And to me, the rest of the film bore that out, because there was kind of a campy element to that, whereas I think there are several scenes in Ancora, Domani, There's Still Tomorrow, that handle that in magical realism that you're talking about in a much more subtle way that don't have to be quite so showy. So, if she had the camera circle around them 3 or 4 times, I don't think it would have stuck out for me. But instead, she does like 13 or 14 circles, which seems to me like kind of gilding the lily.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the point of that was to show the idealized love that they're feeling for each other, and not the reality. And the rest of the film has a lot more reality to it.
Well, there is a lot of magical realism in this film, and let's take this opportunity to talk about this. Sila already mentioned the violent sequences being done as tango, and Erin, you mentioned, the bruises disappearing. We're not going to spoil the ending because this film is still in theaters, but you have a scene between Paola Cortellesi's character and her daughter at the end, where this very sweet Italian song plays.
Yeah, I loved that bit. It was so cute. It was adorable. I really, really loved that they did that. What's funny is it actually reminds me of the ending of Jojo Rabbit, when they start dancing to, is it Heroes that they're dancing to? But it reminded me a lot of that, how it just, grabs the audience with, and here's the end of our film, and it's really cute and just a lot of fun to watch.
And again, it's anachronistic. The anachronism says this is still a problem today. To Cortellesi's point, every 72 hours is a woman who was breathing and is now dead because of spousal abuse in Italy. So and I don't have the statistics in front of me for the United States. They can't be that much better. And maybe one of the reasons this film has been so popular everywhere that it's gone, despite being in black and white, despite being filmed in a neo-realistic style in the Romani language, there is a universal acknowledgement that this is something we have to move past as a society.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's a major problem, and calling it to people's attention is very important. And there were things about it that were, a little bone-chilling. Towards the end, one of her friend tells Delia that, next time he's going to kill you. And just hearing someone say that out loud, it's like, oh, no. Because that happens. And it happens so often. And I have friends who've been in that situation. I don't want to name anybody, but yeah, one of my friends actually had to go into hiding when she left her husband because she was convinced he was going to kill her. So, hearing, the character tell Delia that her husband is going to kill her, it's like, that's terrifying. That's terrifying.
Even thinking about this particular scene, I have to take back a little bit of the pressure I put on that scene with circling them as not being as bad as I claimed it to bother me, because she has used a few things that are tactical and comedic at the same time. And one of them, and that's the reason I'm saying that now, one of them is when at some point the kids are bothering in different people in different rooms, and she uses that same system. I'll kill you. So she's really setting the humor on very particular ways in this film, and I found that very interesting how she uses that as a strategy. Not only are they warning her that the husband is going to kill her, not only is her father-in-law a little bit out of range, but even her, to her children, to the little boys, she mentions at least once or twice, I'll kill you. So I find that very good, the way she's turning these little things around.
And to your point, to keep the comedy in it, even though it is very dark comedy, you have to make Ivana, her husband, into adult.
Just like many Italian or very macho people, look at the way he reacts when he's in the presence of his father. He's a nobody. He's a weakling. He's a very weak individual.
Yeah, and that he has to be for the comedy to work, because if he was just a monster, then we're not going to be able to enjoy this film as a comedy. He has to be adult. He has to, and his father is not much better. You have that wonderful, wonderful scene where he says, I don't mind you beating your wife, but you do it too often.
I don't want to hear her suffering.
Yeah, it's all about how it affects him. Like, you're making me feel sorry for her. So stop.
That was hilarious. Because it starts out, you think it's going to go one way, and it does not go the way you're expecting. He doesn't have any sympathy for her.
And the whole thing about you should have married your cousin like I married my cousin.
Yeah.
That is tremendous. That is so crazy.
It's very Rudy Giuliani. The whole film is metaphorical for post-war Italy. I've been reading some of the history. I am not an expert on Italian history at all. So basically looking at Wikipedia and whatnot, trying to get an idea of what was actually going on in Italy
Erin,
at this
that's
time.
fine. We used to have someone on the show who literally would just read IMDb for his entire segment. So you referring to Wikipedia does not bother me in the least.
I feel like a lot of the film is metaphorical, and I believe that Ivano represents fascism, and his father represents the monarchy, and you can kind of see that in the way they interact and the way they treat all of the women. It's a very strong patriarchy that we're dealing with, and I think that's very interesting.
The letter that she gets, that is the center of this film in terms of the plot moving forward, is endemic of that, because that's her first ever piece of mail with her own name on it.
She's essentially property in this family. She has to take the blame for everything that goes wrong, and she does it willingly to protect her kids. Sometimes we saw that when she burned the potatoes. Well, actually, Marcella burned the potatoes, but Delia took responsibility for it so that Ivano wouldn't beat Marcella. She does a lot of protecting her children and taking the blame and taking the beatings so that her kids don't have to.
And her daughter's marriage to the Moretti family, and how that's worked out as if they were some kind of, I don't know, two rival dukes making a, as opposed to these piss poor urban dwellers, and marrying some black marketeers who made enough money to buy a deli. It is a perfect example of that.
I also kind of think that they represent the rural people, because if you look at how one of the themes that pops up from time to time is that there's this election coming up, and in 1946 there was the election that created the Italian Republic, and a lot of the rural people wanted to keep the monarchy, but the urban people wanted to have a republic, and so I think the Morettis are kind of representing the rural people in that way, and which I think is
not kind of. They are constantly being referred to as rubes, as upstarts, as these country bumpkins who sold out the resistance to the Germans, were paid for it and bought this deli. Now that and the sense that you get is the reason why these deli owners, which that's so weird to us in the United States, where your local entrepreneur, who owns a sandwich shop is somehow king of the neighborhood. Just seems odd, but are willing to marry down into this family is because they are rather.
You can see how that plays out when you find out what Giulio is really like. That it's history's going to repeat itself, and they're having Marcella marry into that family is basically selling her to these bastards that got rich hurting people,
I want to tread carefully here because I don't want to do any spoilers, but I want to talk about how wonderful this film is in integrating what looks like little slice of life scenes and then having them incorporate into the plot. So you have, you had already mentioned when she picks up the photo of William's family, the African American soldier, and realizing that they're all African Americans, gives it to the soldier because he's obviously the only black man in Rome at that time, and he says that he owes her a favor, and how when she calls that favor in, it is to disrupt this marriage, is just genius. I can't. There's no spoilers in what I just said, right? That I think that.
No, I don't think so.
I think just shows the ingeniousness, not just of how this film is structured in terms of, as we continue to compliment Cortellesi's direction, but how the screenplay really, because this is not one of those films where, in inverted commas, nothing happens. Everything happens, and there is nothing that happens in this film that doesn't directly relate to the plot and to its very, very controversial ending. And while I don't think it's wrapped up in a way that would be satisfying to someone on the emotional level, say, who wants a sweet, nice, happy ending. It wraps every single one of these things up perfectly, and yet it still feels messy the way life does. And I think it's ingenious. And of course, in Italy, we always have this problem of you never know who to credit for the for the screenplay, because they always have 200 different credits on the screenplay just because of how their version of the Writers Guild worked. But Cortellesi co-wrote the screenplay based on her memories from her grandmother telling stories about after the war. And she decided to film them in the neo-realist style because that's just because those are the movies that she saw from that period, like Roberto Rosselini's Rome Open City, or Vittoria de Sica's The Bicycle Thieves, or Shoeshine. But it's interesting to me as a film historian that the techniques that she uses aren't neo-realist, except for that she's shooting out on the street, because that was Roberto Rossellini's big move, was to take it out of the studio and actually film on the street, which is why you have to do a lot of post-dubbing in Italian films, because Sensidia Studios was built right next to an airport. And so all Italian films are dubbed, but she uses a lot of street recording, except with the exception of the scene between her and William, the soldier, which again, you can hear that William is actually dubbed in a studio and she is not. Because the Italians, when they took it out into the streets, they didn't care about that if the sound quality wasn't all that great, because the whole point was you could taste the dirt, and you can taste the dirt here, don't get me wrong, but there's a slickness to her style that reminded me more of the films of the 1960s. I think of Mario Monicelli, who directed Big Deal on Madonna Street, which it was a very, very big hit here, but a film that a lot of people haven't seen, starring Marcello Mastroianni, called The Organizer, that took place at the turn of the century, about a union organizer, that I think parallels much better with this film, because while there are comic moments in the Rossellini films, especially Rome Open City, if you think of something like Germany Year Zero or those type of films, there's much more sentimentality than comedy, and this, like Monticelli, has no sentimentality whatsoever.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, and it doesn't glamorize her life or anything like that. One thing I actually really love is the way Delia looks faded when you compare her to Marcella. Like, she seems like she's like prematurely gray and doesn't wear makeup, and she just looks like she's not really fully there, but she is fully there. She's taking care of to the situation.
Cortellesi is a very famous television comedian, and I can't imagine an American comedian. I can't imagine like Fran Drescher deciding she's going to make a film and allow herself to appear as frumpy as this throughout, as vulnerable as Cortellesi allows herself to be throughout this. And it's not just a wonderful performance, and it is absolutely spectacular, and she won the Italian equivalent of the Oscar for Best Actress for this, and very much deserved. But it's just as wonderful a physical performance, I think.
She was so perfect in this role. I've never seen anything else that she's done, but this, you believe this is a real person, and she's very likable.
She's basically the Italian Fran Drescher. Her character is that she has an annoying, is that she has a voice.
That's funny, because that doesn't come across at all in the way she plays this role. She's just so amazing in this.
Well, absolutely not. And I can imagine being an Italian who grew up with her on your television and then seeing this transfer. Maybe that's part of the reason it was so incredibly popular. And interestingly enough, and I'm getting this from a podcast interview that she gave, but she said that 48% of the tickets were sold to men in Italy. This wasn't a feminist popular movie. This movie was popular among men and women. And I wonder if some of those things that we're talking about with the magical realism and the violence as tango, if that might have been her way of selling this to men so that men could think about these issues without immediately feeling the way we do, say, Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull, where we're just like, wow, what an asshole, you know, and so you got this vehemence against him, but by making Ivano such a dolt and such a comic, a figure of comedy, and to Sila's point, such a weakling, I wonder if that was where she's succeeded in creating something not only very, very artistic, but something very, very popular. Used it to get her very, very important message across.
This point about almost 50% of men wanting to see the movie, I want to speak first about that in terms of what she, to my understanding, how she explains it. And that is that when I see you dancing with me while I'm beating you, then you become an accomplice. And that's one of the, I'm not attacking her for that, and I'm not attacking the idea based on that. But when you're dancing, when you have a choreography about the beating of me, then I am complicit. I'm agreeing with it. I'm agreeing as an artful expression. And that might be one of the reasons that the men could take it. Basically, another explanation for what you just said. Based on the way she presented the topic, they don't feel as attacked as they would feel otherwise. But another point that I've been thinking about since yesterday is that there are many ways of feeling about rape or feeling about physical abuse on this level. Even a person who has been a victim of either of these actions could feel as different types of victims, could also be angry or not angry, could also be a protector or see itself as a very, very bad victim. When I look at this film, I'm also trying to ask myself, what type of sympathy do I feel when I have a conversation about physical abuse or anything in that realm? What is my deeper stand on that? Am I angry at all the men that do that? Let's say my father used to beat me a lot, and there's a lot of complexity in the way I might have been raised, namely that my mother defended those actions or not, or she was part of it. There are many ways that I could feel bad about my experience of being beaten by my father. And that could depend on, I think, dozens of connections. And that's how I'm going to make fun of it or attack it or avoid the topic or any other possibilities that there are. And I find very interesting, that's the reason I'm mentioning this, that when we see a woman making this film and she puts herself in the center of the picture as an accomplice in terms of I'm dancing a tango with it. And tango, as we might know, it's a very, very aggressive, very sensual, but it's a very aggressive back and forth. I could never know really what she's trying to tell us. Not to Italians, not to foreigners, not to cinema goers. I can never really know what she's trying to say because her story, her personal story, or what she's getting from Italian society could have many layers that I can never define in just one way of saying, well, that was bad or that was good or that was complete. Even in the conversations of the father, of the husband with his father, as we just spoke about, there are different layers as to what is going on there. So we cannot just say this was bad or it is too complex, it's too mixed in terms of feelings and in terms of how humanity reacts to such problems.
That reminds me of a story when the French ambassador Dominique first went to Argentina and was taken to a club and shown the tango, and he was asked what he thought of it. He said, "It's nice, but in France we do that in the privacy of our own homes and horizontally with no clothes." And that is, I think, the implication of those scenes. There is something about this use of this tango to suggest that this is the psychosexual dynamic of this relationship. And some feminists, I'm not going to quote them here because I just don't happen to have it, have said that in this way, Cortellesi is letting men off the hook in this film. But to me, Erin Brown, if Cortellesi wanted to let men off the hook, she could have kept this a film about 1946, and Sila and I could have walked out and said, yeah, wow, that used to be a problem, as opposed to making it so clear that this is a contemporary problem.
Domestic violence victims can't solve the problem themselves. We have to reach out to the abusers in a way that they don't feel attacked, because they're the ones that have to fix themselves to solve the problem. It's not the victim's fault that they're being beaten. It's the abuser. But the same way that feminism is trying to educate men as well about how to treat women. We can't solve this problem ourselves. We need to bring in men who are willing to listen and be feminists themselves. So with the domestic violence, she doesn't want to run off the men that are coming to see the movie, because, some of them, I mean, out of, I don't know how many people saw this movie, but, just statistically, there are going to be abusers in the audience. And instead of alienating them, maybe educating them is where she's going with it. Because it's not something we can just fix. We need to bring people in, just like trying to fix racism or homophobia or anything like that. We need to educate people so that they can become better. And that's how the problem gets.
About 40 million people have seen this film, by the way, which is very good very good for an Italian black and white film with subtitles. It actually is currently the number 9 grossing film in Italian history, just past the film that Sila mentioned earlier, Bellini's Life is Beautiful. It just surpassed it with this American release, which, by the way, you can see it in the theater right now. And I do encourage people to do that. Two of the main anachronisms in the opening of the film, I mentioned that it opens with a literal slap in the face, in which Delia wakes up and says good morning to Ivano, and Ivano slaps her across the face. And this scene is shot in the traditional golden frame, which is that frame that is basically a square, just a tiny bit longer than it is tall. And the whole opening sequence is also filmed in mono instead of stereo sound. And you have 3 anachronisms come up as the film moves, she goes through the kitchen, she does her morning routine as if she hadn't just had the life slapped out of her, or you're surprised she still has all of her teeth, because it is a hard slap, and it's a shocking way to open the film. And then the anachronism, you really can't notice it as much on digital, I noticed last night watching it on television, as I noticed it in the theater, where the screen widens from that golden frame into the more traditional 16:9 frame, but it's done in one long tracking shot when she gives the man who discovers the grandfather dead later in the film a sandwich, and you have that tracking shot, and the modern song kicks on. The Little Things by Big Giant Feet kicks on. In the theater, suddenly it's in full surround stereo, and you get the anachronisms all in one fell swoop. It's now a widescreen film, which may be why the directorial style reminded me more of Bellaccio and Monticelli in the 60s, who also shot in black and white and in widescreen. And I've said this before, I'm a sucker for anything black and white widescreen. If it says Panavision on it and in black and white, I'm at least going to watch that whole film just for visual reasons. I just absolutely I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful style. What that did for me in the theater, so again, if you can go see this in the theater, do, it brought home, suddenly, this isn't in the way past. I can't write it off as the past is a different country. Boy, they do things differently there anymore, because she isn't allowing us to. Because she is saying deliberately, yes, you are supposed to judge this from a modern point of view, because it is still a modern problem.
If I remember correctly, or if I read correctly, this is her very first film as director. And I am curious as to where she will be in 10 years if she makes another 5 films or 3. Because I think there's a lot of potential for what she's trying to do, at least in my very simple perception of cinema. And at the same time, I think that she will be very apologetic in about 10 years about certain things she did that she could have done much better. And I think one of them would be that on one side, she's breaking with tradition by having this cafe explode, but the way she does it is not clean. It is not clear to me, did he help her or not? It's a very weird scene when at least I understand it that way, William helped her to do that. But that's not an acceptable way of breaking tradition. You cannot get a soldier who has certain responsibilities to do the dirty work for you, because you're basically doing the same shit that the Italians have been doing. I really like what she did as a whole, but I'm thinking of a couple of things where I would say...
The cafe was owned by Nazi collaborators, though. That's the point.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's the point. The grandfather makes a big point that when the Morettis are over, the grandfather makes a big point that they made all of their money, not just in the black market, but by literally selling the partisans out to the Germans when Rome was declared an open city. Yeah. So those are Nazi collaborators.
I understand that. Still, I find it as a cinema maker, as a director, and based on the few people that I have followed a little bit, Bergman, Scorsese, and a few others, I think she could have solved that problem more smoothly. it's too hidden for me. I find it very confusing.
And I'm going to go with, just as Erin's favorite scene in the film was the circling camera, that was my favorite sequence for exactly the reasons that you don't like it. Because it didn't feel like it needed to be explicit. You just know. You're putting two and two together. And it also is why it reminded me a lot of the better works of Monticelli and Bellaccio. Again, very underrated, not because neither of those names are names you hear alongside of Fellini and Antonioni when we're talking about the 60s in Italian film. But the idea that through that montage, we are collaborating with her by putting together the sequence of events. Oh, so this was the favor, etc., etc. And I'm sorry, I disagree with you, Sila. I think she handled it perfectly, and she has absolutely nothing to apologize for. I don't think Scorsese would have handled that.
If I would have seen this film twice or three times already, I would probably not be saying most of the things I've said tonight, because I would grasp a different context much wider, and I would see other details or hear other details that I oversaw the first time around. I think the film is actually very complex for many reasons, that some of the points you're talking about, I would not need to be reminded of those or not pointed out to those if I would have seen twice or three times already.
I've seen this 3 times. I saw it once in the theater. I saw it again in January when it was on Apple TV for Sila, you were there for our best of 2024 list, because this was, I think, my second, or it might have been my favorite. Oh yeah, it was tied with Love Lies Bleeding for my favorite film of 2024 on that episode. And then I watched it again last night to refresh myself for this episode, and I've gotten something different out of it each time. Quite obviously, the first time to me this was Delia's story. In my second viewing, I really saw this as Marcello's story, and in the third viewing, I really thought things that I had thought were maybe a red herring or something like just to kind of throw us off the scent came to the fore. So that flirting relationship with the mechanic, and the idea that he can never make up his mind, and that is how Delia ended up with Ivano, because Ivano was aggressive and was able to just take her, whereas the fact that Nino wasn't able to close the deal with her. Something I noticed on this third viewing, Nino isn't able to close the deal on anything. He's never able to make up his mind. That's why he's losing his business. That's why he's got to move up north, and that's why she's with Ivano, because despite him being an oaf, and just everyone in the neighborhood knows he's just no good, not even particularly faithful to her. He has this kind of personality that allows him to just kind of dominate the situation, and so he could sweep in, and Nino, again, not necessarily the nice guys finish last, but he who hesitates is lost. Was the theme that I came away with on the third viewing. So I actually feel like I saw 3 different.
They had that montage of how their relationship evolved. There's a thing called love bombing, and abusers do this all the time. They come on strong, like they love you and they're going to do anything for you, and you're going to give you the perfect life, and everything's going to be great. And then once you're in a committed relationship, that's when they change. So he didn't start abusing her until they were already married.
Real quick,
I-
it's also interesting. That's how cults work, too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the psychology is the same. They draw you in and make you feel something, but it turns out it's not real. I agree with you that Nino wasn't good at making decisions, but I feel like Ivano did come in and love bomb her, and that's why they ended up together. And I also I really, really, really love that in the montage they showed Ivano going down on one knee and acting like, he puts his hand out and like she's shot him in the heart with Cupid's arrow or whatever. That's kind of what the gesture seemed like to me. And as soon as she sees Giulio do the exact same gesture, that's when she knows she needs to call in that favor.
Correct. Yes.
I was
And that's great
I love
because I didn't even perceive that until you mentioned it just now.
Yeah, it was.
That was wonderful.
I loved it.
Thank you, Erin, because that's another layer to this film. I had thought it was her over this whole thing about the makeup, where he grabbed her
That
face.
was part of it too.
But no,
Yeah, that
you're
was-
right. She has that great parallel, and I never even thought of that. But the two, they're almost identical in the montage flashback, and with Giulio on the street corner. That's wow. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I mean, Giulio revealed himself later with the makeup, but yeah, that's when you knew something was up. I thought that was really clever how she did that.
And yeah, and I hadn't really perceived that whole love bombing until now. I gotta watch this film a fourth time now.
There you go.
I did want to talk about, without spoiling the ending, the controversy around the ending, which I cried the first time that I saw this film. Had absolutely no thought that I had been led down to a twist that I didn't even think of it as a twist ending. I really felt like that ending scene with her and her daughter, those were earned tears. On the second viewing, yeah, I guess I could see maybe Cortellesi is setting us up to something more typically Hollywood, I guess, is going to happen. And that actually just impressed me more that the film didn't fall down that sentimental hole. But to me, this ending was extremely satisfying, and I felt that it was actually a happier ending than the one that we are led to believe it's leading up to. But before we wrap up, I want to get both of your opinions. Again, please don't spoil what the ending is, because I'll just have to edit that part out.
When I first watched the film, I was confused by the ending because I was expecting what they were leading to. But the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. Because I expected a certain thing. They led us to believe a certain thing, but it's not like the hints weren't there all along. It was the way it ended. They had been just bits and pieces popping up. The more I think about it, and the more I've had to look up what Italy was like in 1946 and learning the history, and the more I could see the metaphors in the film. And now that I've thought about it, I think it's a great ending. And without spoiling anything, one of the themes of the whole film is she wants to make things better for Marcella. And this ending shows that's happening. And I love it. I really, 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 I love this film. I love everything about this film. And that ending, when I think about it, it's like, yes, that is the perfect ending for this.
And just like Erin, and probably just like almost everyone else who has seen the film, I was very surprised when the film finished, and I went to read the plot in a few places just to figure out if I missed something, because I found it, I felt I was being misled. I also find very odd that we get 3 or 4 opportunities to find out what's in the letter, and we never get to see it. For me, the great thing about this manipulation is that in the end, it was not what we thought it was, namely a personal thing. I found that very well played into even disappointment, but with this tick. And that also belongs to the fact that I mentioned today, earlier. You could never see the film the same way again, because now you know what that note was about, and that changes the whole spectrum of how you see the film the second time. That was
And
what
let's talk
I
about
was trying to
society
say.
real quick. And Erin again did some research, or did the quick internet research version on the 1946 election. Let's talk about the central metaphor here. So the 1946 election was the first time women could vote, which was great that they had suffrage. But let's talk about that election real quick. So, for instance, women were told to remove their lipstick before they sealed the envelope. And the reason why is because the men in charge knew that the people counting it, if they saw lipstick on a ballot, or I had read that they, even if they smelled women's perfume on a ballot, they would automatically chuck those ballots out because they assumed that the women would be voting for socialism. But there's a central metaphor throughout about this idea that, okay, they got their rights at the ballot box, but they still have no rights at home. They're still property.
Not letting Marcella go to school because she needs to learn a trade. Just right up front, it just says that's all you're here for, is to make money.
And there's a second note. There's a second note, and I don't know how well it came through the subtitles, but it's beautiful, where she leaves Marcello some money and in an envelope, and the note is, "This is so you can go to school," and in the subtitles it spells can with a K, to kind of show that that Delio never really got much schooling. But if you actually look at the note itself, it's written in almost chicken scratchings, and every word is misspelled.
Yeah, and when they showed her writing the note, the way she was holding the pencil was like she didn't know how.
Yes,
she really
correct.
hadn't been taught. And so that's part of making a better world for Marcella. She gives her the money so she can go get an education, because you'll do about anything for your kids, including blowing up a Nazi collaborator's bar, And yeah, it was,
which we don't encourage, wink wink, here
No.
Yeah, so if you have a Nazi collaborator who owns a bar in your neighborhood, don't go blow up their bar. Don't go blow up their bar. That's the message from world cinema history.
Don't blow shit up. I do stand
However,
by
I
always
do
punch
have
Nazi.
a couple of addresses. If you are inclined, of bars not to blow up, owned by Nazis.
Yeah. So always punch Nazis. But don't blow up their bars.
A side note for those who might find that cute, the term barista, which of course has to do with coffee, was Mussolini's way of introducing something that's very Italian, and that actually comes from being in the bar and not from making coffee. So that was we have that thanks to Mussolini.
Hard to thank Mussolini for anything, but that's interesting. That's an interesting point. Another thing that I really like about this film, it's from 2023, but it shows how misogyny is inherent in fascism. Because, look at what's going on in the world now. Look at what's going on specifically in the United States right now, where women are losing rights. And misogyny is just rampant. You can't go online without some Andrew Tate wannabe saying horrible, horrible things about all women, and having this film now showing how the patriarchy is a very bad thing. That's, very timely. I'm really glad that's there.
The fact that I got to watch it in a multiplex where Deadpool and Wolverine was playing in the next theater back in, what was it, I think in November when I saw this the first time. To see a film with this amount of complexity in Italian, in black and white, just brought joy to my ever-loving cinemaphile heart.
I want to mention something we haven't spoken about. Actually, we mentioned it very shortly, and that is her acting. I found tremendous, and her directorial hand unto herself, namely how she is supposed to stand out in certain situations and do her thing in certain situations, and in other situations she is very much almost like a backdrop. I found that exceptional, the way she plays and the way she lets herself play as a director. For example, the scene where she's smoking a cigarette with her friend, leaning against the wall, they take a short break. There's something so typical Italian and so relaxed about that little scene, which really is not conveying too much on content, but as a typical Italian, let's relax. I found that scene absolutely beautiful.
And well, and the way she frames it too, before you get to your next point.
Yeah.
She allows it to be done in golden frame, and she just uses the alleyway as a frame around it, so it feels like a slice of life from a neo-realistic. You feel like you're watching something that Vittoria de Sica shot for Bicycle Thieves, or Rosselini shot for Rome of the City.
You see, that's the wonder and the beauty of knowing about film, the way you can you basically set very accurately with reference points what I was actually trying to say, but I couldn't because it was only a perception for me, but not a reference point. But yes, that's what I mean. Another scene that I found spectacular in terms of letting out the character. When the third time or fourth time she meets William, he is trying to really say something to her.
Hey, man, maybe I scared you. Scusami se io ho fatto paura. I didn't mean to.
No, non ti preoccupare, fa niente.
What's this? Again.
Che vuoi? Un truppato, lascialo andare, va.
And she walks away. Oh, it's touching. You're always touching. I love the way the character brings out herself. At the beginning when she said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand it. It's so Italian, but it's so basic Italian, but it is so cinema Italian at the same time, because we know these typical great Italian actors, the way they have done this, and we also know it from when we go to Italy, and there's so much reference that you just fall in love with it because that is so typical in so many ways.
Well, and the fact that she shoots it on the streets as opposed to in the studio, the way, say, Fellini in La Dolce Vita recreated Rome in Sincia studio, I think adds that flavor that you can taste the dirt in the road. You can feel the gravel under their feet. You can feel the atmosphere.
Yes, correct.
And you can smell the pasta cooking especially for the scenes that you're talking about.
Of course, that goes over in the same way, or I would say it should go over the same way when we are dealing with abuse. Namely, we should smell as much, we should feel as much from from the Italian reality, even though we, of course, don't know the reality of 1946 ourselves. We have read about it, but we really don't know it. There's no way we can know it. But I think the film, and now that I think of that, I remember something that I noticed at the beginning of the film. There's something also very chamber-like about it, and I would even say a little bit more like Broadway theater. There are certain camera shots and certain movements that I remember from the first 10 minutes that it's almost like Broadway, where you're sitting right there and you see I cannot explain it too well, but I found that very
Can I give it a shot, Sila? Because
Yes.
I sense the same thing. I think this is Cortellesi as an actress directing around her, and you mentioned that it feels theatrical, and the reason why I think it feels theatrical is because she's not focusing on movement, she's focusing on faces, and she's focusing on emotion, and she is framing, especially I would say throughout the first whole 10 minutes, where you need to get to know these characters, this group in this neighborhood, and you need to get to know this area, but she is allowing her actors to best portray their characters, and I think she gives absolutely wonderful performances from every actor in this film. But I also think that she is moving the camera to best advantage them and to make them look as good as possible. And that, I think, is, especially for that opening 10 minutes, you can tell this is directed by somebody who has worked as an actor. Did I put words into your mouth, Sila?
No, that's pretty much it. Again, I wouldn't have said it that way because I just don't have that perception. But it just, and those are two different important things for the individual. One, what you know because you have dove into it, you have studied it, you have whatever you have done to become a so-called expert, or because of who we are individually, we are just noticing things that we cannot put our finger in it, but it has a working, it has an effect. And I like, especially in a conversation where we can have both, when we get to hear how a person feels, and on the other hand, how a person makes references to why we're feeling that way.
And I think a lot of what does that as well is Marchitelli's beautiful musical score. I'm not talking about the needle drops, and I'm not talking about the tango, I'm talking about the actual score, which not only enhances the Italianness, so, you know, the and the neo-realist Italianness of it, but subtly, without drawing attention to itself, underlies the emotion of the scene. When she goes to give the shot to the wealthier family, and she's watching the maid and watching them do their breakfast, and the music, it's subtle. It's not so you're going to go, oh wow, that's very, very beautiful music, but it's perfect. And anybody who watched the show Mayor of Easttown, Marchitelli did the score for that show, which is, I think, the best score for any television program ever. It's better than the show, I thought. And or another film, The Great Beauty, I think, is a highly underrated soundtrack. But probably best work was for this film, because the score just, quite honestly, just every beat is perfect. This is a pianist sitting down and getting every note correct for a whole concerto. It was beautiful.
The last moments, the last seconds where we hear how this becomes one, first the background music and then the closing of the mouths. That whole situation I found very weird, but very good. It was, I've never seen anything like that where I react on that, like on separate layers to what's going on auditively and acoustically. What am I saying? Auditively and visually. And I still don't know why I like it, but it was a very interesting experience, something I was never expecting. I don't think I've ever witnessed something like that, where the sound and the visuals are being mixed in such a separate way. But that is what makes it a little bit weird. But it, for me, it worked very well as an interesting effect.
Well, I saw this in the theater in Atlanta, Georgia. Not the biggest hub of foreign film, but they have a huge cinephile community with a rather large crowd, and I was crying in the theater, and I was not alone with that scene. There was something, the lump that it put in my throat, and maybe it was something about communicating with the other people in the theater, not as emotionally triumphant for me when I watched it on streaming the 2 times. Maybe because I'd already seen the scene, and so it wasn't out of the blue. I don't know, but in the theater, that and I'm not a crier. I don't cry at films, but I cried.
I think it has a lot to do with what I said before. This last information bit we get is not a personal one. And when we see this going on with the mouth shut and smiling and communicating in this way, and then the way the people are going down to steps, confronting Ivano with their mouth shut, it makes it again a very, very social, effective activity. And I think that's what makes us so emotional about it. The social aspect of it, and it has nothing to do with what that person achieved or what. It's just we're all in it.
All right, let's wrap this up with our final thoughts. I'm going to move first to Ms. Erin Brown. Erin, your final thoughts on ancora domani, aka There's Still Tomorrow.
I loved everything about it. I just thought it was a brilliant film. It was so fun to watch, and it had a great message. I just loved it. I'm going to watch it again.
I'll tell you, one of the when I was just saying the name there, it made me think that there is a scene where the internet has completely ruined me in this film, and it's one of the funnier scenes in the film where 2 women are going back and forth over the dead grandfather, just saying swear words about him. Somebody pops their head in and says, "Will you pray for me?" And then the plans that we're not spoiling being spoiled comes up, and Delia says "C'è ancora domani," there's still tomorrow. And gosh darn, the clever people over at the pitch meeting on YouTube, I immediately turned to the screen and said, "That's the name of the movie!" And it ruined probably, one of the better scenes in the film for me, because the internet has completely corrupted me. Sila Blume, final thoughts on "C'è ancora domani." That's the name of the movie.
I'll just repeat myself, I guess. I really, really like the movie. I need to see it again. One situation where I found there was a different Ivano on the screen is when Dalia is asking him who is who is the old one, next to you. His facial expression was the only moment where I felt that he was a nice person in terms of being bonded with her. The way he looked at the old woman and responded, I don't know. I found that scene very beautiful in the simplicity of Ivano's acceptance of the question and willingness to respond seriously to his wife. And the old woman, she comes up
And we
again
never
later
do
on.
find out who she is.
No, but when
Who's
she
the old
says,
bag? I
when
don't
her
know.
friend says
Who's
to her,
that old bag? I don't know.
no, but
Chicken.
yeah, but at the end, she takes her out and says, you're smelling a little moldy.
Oh, no, even more. She says, get yourself something to drink because otherwise we'll have 2 funerals.
And then she wants to come back in to pray and say, no. Yeah, you prayed enough. Stay outside. I think it's a great movie. There's a lot of Italianness stuff to it, which I love, and a lot of experimental things in my perception about what Cortellesi is trying to do or achieving. I would suggest to anyone to see the movie, and thank you very much for discussing this movie.
Well, thank you very much for making this discussion better, Sila. We appreciate you. And again, if you're listening to this when it's released, this is still playing in theaters in the United States. It was released on March. And if you are listening in the future, it's also available on to rent on YouTube, and Apple TV, and Amazon. So I highly recommend seeing this film. If you can, however, see it in the theater, I highly recommend it. Next week, we are going to be taking a week off. Dear friend of the show, Mark Redfield, has been hospitalized and is in a coma. And we have decided, hopefully as a treat for when he recovers, to do an episode called The Best of Mark Redfield, where we're going to edit together all the best parts of his commentary here on the show over the last 2 years into one episode. So look for that next week, The Best of Mark Redfield. And if you are religious, please put Mark in your prayers. And if you are not, please just keep him in your thoughts. He was the one and only reason the show was not canceled completely in November of 2024. And he was a great influence on us, and we love him dearly here. So look for that next week. Other than that, Sila Blume, where can people find you online?
Well, right now, all I am doing is around the wonderful country of Ecuador, where I am now, and will be another month, and that's my web presence is all about that right now. silablume.life, and you will see a lot of things about food, about Ecuador, about culture here, and I think a lot more people should have access to simpler country.
Erin Brown, aka Toad Puppy, where can people find you online?
I'm on Blue Sky at toadpuppy.bluesky.social, so you can find me there.
And those on the artist formerly known as Twitter can find me at ETROMMATER. And thank you very much for listening. If you are listening on Apple, please consider taking a moment to write us a review. If you are listening on YouTube, click the globe in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and hit subscribe, like, comment, and all that internet jazz that everyone begs you to do. Do it for us too. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week on World Cinema History.